Can Josh Hart translate his magical playoffs from last year into a little more consistency in the regular season? Will his three-point shot finally come around? How's he going to factor into small ball this year? We're going to talk about all that in our Josh Hart season preview right now.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks, and we want to remind you this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And we want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit that auto download function on your favorite podcast app or the notification bell on YouTube so you never miss an episode, because we are here for you guys once again with the season coming up 5 days a week right now. So don't want to miss any episodes. I'm Alex Wolfe. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site, The Strickland, which you can find at strick.land. And he's Gavin Schall, favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. And perhaps your favorite bench player is Josh Hart. And if that's the case, then this is the episode for you. So, Gavin, the tail of the tape, I'll break it down real quick and then throw it to you so we can start getting into some interesting stats here other than just the counting stats, which maybe are interesting to some people. Josh Hart, 29 years old this year, going into his 8th year in the NBA. In 23 to 24, he averaged about 9 points per game, 8 rebounds per game, 4 assists, a steal, shot 43% from the field, 31% from three, and 79% from the free throw line in 33 minutes per game. But in the playoffs, as we saw, guy went crazy. 14.5 points per game, 11.5 boards per game, 4.5 assists per game, 2 stocks per game, 44% from the field, 37% from three on 4.5 attempts per game, and 73% from the free throw line. Then his career, things look pretty similar. So he's nothing if not consistent. At least his career stats are similar to what his full season stats were last year. 9.8 points, 6.6 boards, 2.7 assists, 1 steal, 45.9% from the field, 34.4% from three, 79.1% from the free throw line in 29.2 minutes per game. So actually last year, shooting wise, kind of down across the board, except from the free throw line, but the 3-point shooting down a bit from his career average, the overall shooting down a bit from his career average, even just the amount of points he was scoring down a bit. But we saw he brings a lot more to the floor than what you just see on a stat sheet. And I think especially down the stretch of the season with all the injuries and everything, the Knicks relied on him to play 48 minutes numerous times, which is kind of crazy to think about in today's day and age. But all in all, just a really great year for him that was capped by a really phenomenal playoffs where he just played until the wheels quite literally fell off, or perhaps one of his ab muscles just fell right off of his body. It was a really great year for Josh last year, and hopefully a sign of things to come for this year.
Yeah, he was exceptional down the stretch. Can only call his playoff performance heroic, and it capped off a season where I think it was like a steady climb up the mountain, because you and I were reminiscing a little bit pre-show. It's easy to forget, like, and we'll get into some of the like direct stuff on it a little bit later, but he had a really slow start to last season, both in terms of his role, his minutes played, and his shooting was like shockingly abysmal. And he went from a guy who was just this game changer after that trade in the 2022-2023 season to someone who was stopped a little bit against the Miami Heat in that playoff run when they just kind of dared him to shoot threes, and he was a little bit scared to shoot threes. And it felt like there was some carryover into the start of last season, and it took him a little bit of time to overcome that. And there were moments early last year where I was questioning that contract, and I was saying, look, it's never going to be like a terrible deal just because of how smart he is and the effort he puts in and his athleticism. But there were moments there where I'm like, if this guy just is afraid to shoot from distance, like, can you play him meaningful minutes in the playoffs? And I went from asking that question to him being the Knicks. Like, I mean, it was him, Isaiah Hartenstein, or Dante DiVincenzo in some order. I would probably argue he was the Knicks' second best player in their playoff run that ended a game away from the conference finals. So, I mean, what an incredible turnaround for him. And that was certainly reflected in a couple of the stats we're going to go over, Alex. I figure we can go back and forth on these. The first one that we pulled, he is currently, after just a season and a half, sixth all time in Knicks history in plus minus at plus 537. Granted, based on who's on the list, I think that statistic has only been tracked back to the early 90s. There was no one before about Charles Oakley on there. So not Knicks history, but in the last 35 years or so, he is sixth on the Knicks in plus minus. This is not a Josh Hart stat, but I thought this was incredible. Out of the top 10 on that list, half of them were on the roster at some point last season. Emmanuel Quickley is first all time in that statistic. OG Anunoby, though, is somehow 10th after only 23 career regular season games. So expect him to continue to go up there.
Yeah, I guess OG is going to be the all-time leader by the end of next season if things
by Christmas, Alex.
by Christmas, right? Yeah, what a gift that might be if he manages to pull that off. That also explains, if that stat only goes back to the early 90s, that explains why Clyde still refers to plus minus as an advanced stat. Because I guess they didn't have that back in the 70s.
He loves citing it as a catch-all in games. He's like, when 8 of the 9 guys are plus minus, Mike, it's not going to be a good night.
Yeah, plus minus is one of my favorite Clydeisms. It's just a ridiculous statement that he makes so regularly. But yeah, my first interesting stat for Josh is his 3-point attempt rate, which sort of stood out to me. I was looking, I went to just go confirm my thoughts, my estimation that it was going to be like abysmally low, like 20% or something. So basically 3-point attempt rate is just it's very simple. It's the percentage of shots that a guy takes that are from 3 out of his overall chunk of shots. And so I was going there expecting like, oh yeah, it's going to be so low. It's going to be like 25%, something like that. And I went and I was really surprised to see it was actually 38%. So 38% of his shots last year were threes. And then ironically, that was actually his highest number since 2020 to 21 with the Pelicans. So the last number of years, that's his highest number. And for the first 4 years of his career, this knocked my socks off. He shot between 52 to 66% of his shots were from 3-point territory his first 4 years in the league. Wow. Which is crazy to think for a guy that now sometimes seems so reluctant to let it rip from there. So I have some more thoughts on his 3-point shot that are going to come a little later in the episode, but just as an appetizer, I thought that stat was just really interesting and not really indicative of the eye test for much of last year.
Yeah, I was stunned reading those Pelican numbers, and I was stunned seeing the number for last year, because my memory of early season Josh Hart was that whatever got into him, whether it was the yips or what, in that Heat series where they were just like, hey man, shoot, and he refused to do it. And this was you got to remember, the whole conversation going into last year was, all right, the Knicks need Quentin Grimes, which was just saying Quentin Grimes makes me feel like it's a million years ago right now. They need him to be in the starting lineup and shoot a ton of threes, and basically need him to be closing games over Josh Hart because he can make threes and he's a willing 3-point shooter. And it felt like Josh Hart was kind of proving that right early last season. And it went from that to someone in the playoffs, we'll get into it in a second in terms of his best stretch. He opened up the playoffs hitting 12 threes in the first 3 games, which felt like a miracle. But that was a steadier progression, I think, than I remembered, because as the season went on, and I think there was a pretty clear-cut turning point when the Knicks had all those injuries. It just got to a point where Tibbs was like, if you're open, you better effing shoot it, because we have no one else right now. And I think that kind of broke Josh Hart in a good way, and he sort of regained his mojo from 3.
Yeah, for sure. And then I'll just say my other interesting stat for him real quick. So this is something that we'll probably touch on a little more as we start getting into the methodology of what this team might look like and do a lineup show and everything else. But Josh Hart, Dante DiVincenzo, Deuce McBride together last year, a plus 5.9 net rating last year in a 606 minutes together per NBA stats, meaning they were 6 points better per 100 possessions with those guys on the floor than without. So that's or they just outscored opponents 5.9 points per 100 possessions, not on off. Sorry. So they just outscored guys by 6 points per 100 possessions last year, which is solid. Not the craziest number compared to some of the lineups that the Knicks fielded, but still more than solid. And I think that's a good omen considering things were a little. It took a long time for those three guys to find consistent minutes together last year. So some of that data is probably a little bit skewed by early season returns and just random lineups where they wound up together and weren't quite comfortable yet. With like DiVincenzo taking a while to take that starting job, and then Deuce taking a while to just kind of get it in the rotation period. Hart had a pretty consistent role all year, but I think that sort of speaks to the fact that the bench is in pretty good hands, and that includes Josh Hart, obviously.
Yeah, he is in so many ways going to be, or at least last year was the anchor of those bench lineups. Just with his rebounding, and for a lineup that I think our big concern was that who outside of Jalen Brunson could initiate offense once Julius Randle went down. Obviously, Dante DiVincenzo really stepped up as a scorer, but so often, both late in the regular season and the playoffs, it was sort of on Josh Hart to just get a rebound and kickstart transition. And he is, even with more talent and with someone like Mikal Bridges, who can be a shot creator, someone like Julius Randle, who is a elite shot creator, like there will be moments, there will be times where Hart is still relied on to do that. And I think he's in a lot of ways the most important piece of that trio. One final stat to send us out of this first segment. Josh Hart was rated B-Ball Index's top rebounder amongst guards and small forwards. They refer to the stat as rebounding talent, but I thought that was pretty impressive. They had him even ahead of guys like Luka Doncic, who are 4 inches taller. There were a couple of other, I thought I retweeted them. I guess I didn't. There were a couple of other B-Ball Index stats that were like amazingly generous to Josh Hart. I think he might have been the best finisher last year of guys 6'2" to 6'4", which is really insane given that like it was a super down finishing season for him. And he's typically over 70%, or at least has been the last few years at the rim. And then the other one was like, it was rebounding percentage by how far away the rebound goes from the rim. And it was like 0 to 5 feet, 0 to like 10 to 15, 15 to 20. And Josh Hart was like just the best at his height at like pretty much every single one, but was also one of the best in the NBA, like near the rim, 10 feet from the rim and far away from the rim. And it just tells you that like, even like he is not like we always talk about athleticism as like run and jump athleticism. Like, all right, can the guy do like a 360 windmill off a standstill? And Josh Hart obviously can't do that, but his contact balance and his ability to track the basketball, it is a type of athleticism, and he is just about the best in the world in that. So I always find those stats super, super interesting. I'll try to bring it up again next episode if I can find the specifics on that. But Alex, we need to get into his best game, his best moment from last season. We'll do that in just a sec here on Locked On Knicks. But first, we want to tell you about our good friends over at Prize Picks. So how do you play Prize Picks? Well, Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll in. So, for example, Caleb Williams passing yard gets you 1 win on Prize Picks every week in September. That's right. Only 1 yard gets you an automatic win every football weekend in September. 4 weeks of free W's. Don't miss this deal on Prize Picks because it's gone when September ends. So with how Caleb Williams is playing right now, I don't know if that 1 yard is always a guarantee, but you can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. And what I love about Prize Picks is it's the only real money daily fantasy platform with a injury insurance policy so that your lineup stays in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, Prize Picks returns your pick and it's still live. One thing I went for recently on Prize Picks, the over-under for Malik Neighbors' receptions tonight was 6. You got to pick the over. He is a legend in the making. He had 11 tonight. So that is a fun example of how you can win some money. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA and get $50 instantly When you play $5, that's code locked on NBA at Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game.
And now let's move from fantasy sports to reality sports. And that's with Game Time, because Game Time is my favorite place to get tickets. And they have a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Let me tell you, I'm a customer. I'm a real true blue customer of Game Time. I've talked about it a couple times during this ad read before, but recently I've gone to some Mets games. It's got me considering going to a playoff game should they make it. It's really worrisome that they have to face the Braves in a double header on the last day of the season to potentially decide their fate here. So that might be a little tenuous at the moment, but should they make it, I'm going to be checking out Game Time for sure, because I think going to a playoff game sounds like a lot of fun, and Game Time has done great helping me find great deals this whole month trying to go to Mets games and really soak in all this Mets mania right now. And what's great is that they also offer all-in pricing, so you can toggle that feature and it'll show the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. I always use that because you want to know what you're paying. You don't want to be like, what a great deal, and then click through and be like, plus $50 or whatever. That's never fun. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, we're back in, Gavin, to keep talking through Josh Hart and the season preview, but let's take a trip back in the DeLorean to last season real quick and just go over what his best moment of last year was, because I think this does well to lead into our big questions for him this year, because he was so awesome in the playoffs last year, and I think there's no way around it. That was his best moment of last year. The Sixers series was amazing. I mean, you wrote it here, and I fully agree. The best moment of last year, possibly the best moment of his career, was that three to put the Knicks up with 25 seconds left in game 6, win the series against Philly. I was in Miami on a bachelor party during that, and there was some Sixers fans there, and I almost got in a fight because I was very pumped up over that one. That was a night, man. And he just overall shot so amazing in that series, 12 of 23 from 3 in the first 3 games. Really swung things for the Knicks, and that shooting was so key to them doing what they did, because if he didn't punish the Sixers leaving him open, the Knicks would have been in a lot of trouble, I think, during that series. And he came through huge, and that sort of just leads us into some of the questions that follow him into this new season. How good he was able to be last postseason.
Yeah. I know I've referenced this a couple of times, but to go in 1 year from someone who was afraid to shoot open threes to someone who in rhythm drained like a three that you've seen guys like Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, LeBron James like miss at times was incredible. I mean, it was a series winning shot. Like technically the Sixers had a couple chances to come back down and tie the game, but it proved to be the series winning shot. And very few NBA players can say they have hit that type of shot in a game 6 or later in their career in a series that was obviously the first round, but felt incredibly consequential just because of how competitive it was. And that game kind of felt like the series, because like if it went back to Madison Square Garden game 7, you were talking about a Knicks team that was just exhausted and mentally, I think, would have been defeated after giving up a 3-1 lead. So I just want to drive home that was one of the great shots in the history of Knicks basketball, and it couldn't have come from a better guy. But to your point, yeah, he was exceptional that entire series. I mean, finished that game 6, 16 points, 14 rebounds, 7 assists. I always go back to the fact that he shot 12 for 23 from 3 the first 3 games of the series, and it wasn't in blowouts, right? Like those threes, especially in games 1 and 2, like the Knicks lose. The Knicks are possibly down 0-2 if he's 8 for 23 instead of 12 for 23. With how poorly Jalen Brunson was playing, they needed every single like thing that Josh Hart could give them. And over again, he came through. That first game, 22, 13, and 2. The second game was even better, 21 points, 15 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 blocks, 2 steals. And like he's going out there and out rebounding Joel Embiid game after game when he's 7 inches shorter than the guy, like 60 pounds less. Like it was absurd what he did. There have been very few better performances from a Knicks role player, certainly in team history, but also just like a role player in general. In a big playoff series, like it was just so impressive.
Yeah, and I think that leads into some of the big questions for this year. So maybe we could just bounce back and forth here. We'll ask our big questions. And my first one is, can he find his way back to around 35% or better from deep this season? And this directly ties in with the Sixers series and with the playoffs in general. It's like, well, if you could do that in the playoffs, can you do that in the regular season, please? Because that would be life altering for the Knicks if he could figure that out. The biggest problem with last year, his month to month splits were just comically up and down. I looked them up and it was worse than I remembered. 36% in October from 3, and then shoots 30% in November, 37% in December, 24.5% in January, as the Knicks were having their best month of the season, 34.5% in February, 25.9% in March, and then 41.7% in April. So like a 16%, 17% delta. I mean, just huge. A huge difference from month to month sometimes. And it's just I don't quite get it with him. At times he looks like he's terrified to shoot a 3. You know, he gets the ball and he's wide open and he's like, and then throws it on. Yeah, pump fakes a little bit half-heartedly and is like, you knew what I'm going to do. I'm going to put it on the floor and I'm going to try to drive in, obviously. And then other times he just takes it and he's just like cold-blooded killer mode and just starts shooting them, like you said, like he's Kobe or something. You know, it's like, and it's so hard to get a read on him. So I think that's my first big question for him this year is, can he find his way back to some form of league averageness at 3? Because that makes a big difference for him. Because if he can just be that, he can achieve plenty of other things with all other aspects of his game. If he could just shoot league average from 3. So I hope he can find that. But what's your first big question for him going into this year?
Yeah, I just wanted to note on that one final concluding point. Like it is just so like mental for him. And I'm sure the Knicks employ a sports psychiatrist. And I want Josh Hart to like have to write on a blackboard, I will not pass up open threes like a million times, Bart Simpson style, before every game, because like it's just born out of necessity. Like I remember that game I was referencing earlier against Dallas, where it was literally just him and Dante DiVincenzo. And I think the Knicks were down by 15 points or something. And they started putting together this comeback. And there was like this 6 possession stretch where it was Josh freaking Hart and Luka Doncic like trading threes back and forth. And when you see that, you're like, all right, dude, we're not even asking you to do this. Just shoot the open ones, because he has that within him. And like, he can bring that swagger. He can bring that confidence. It is just so dependent on if it's there. And I think it is a real fear, because I think him shooting as many threes as he did early in his career was because it was necessary. And because the team context called for him to do that. And when he's playing with so much talent, I think there's less of a call for him to do that. But it doesn't mean that it's less important, because the stakes are higher and he still has to shoot it for the Knicks to hit their ceiling. So even more talent, even more guys that can score. Fine if you want to pass up like a good shot for a great shot, but they have to go up. Our next big question on him was, this was also from you, but it's what does the positional role / breakdown look like this year? So you noted from Basketball Reference, he played 69% of his time at small forward and 28% of his time at power forward, according to Basketball Reference. Previous year, he was 85% small forward, 15% power forward. Obviously, you've got Randall to start at the 4, assuming he stays healthy. Every bone in your body crossed for that. Precious can play a little bit of 4, but I don't think he's going to play a ton of 4, just because you don't want him and Jericho Sims out there together, and that's really the only way that's going to happen. OG can play some, but this kind of leads into my big question, which is, how does he ultimately fit into small ball lineups, and how do you use him? Like are you going to use him as a 4 again? Or is OG the guy who's guarding 4s? And I do think like last season's balance is going to be like, it's going to be somewhat similar to that, if a little bit less this season. But Mitchell Robinson getting hurt, Alex, is something that could potentially swing that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And you noted here that you were thinking that like the death lineup could potentially be Jalen Brunson, Dante DiVincenzo, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, and Julius Randle. And I'm totally with you on that. I think that there is a chance that that's it. But you made a note here, like Tibbs might prefer, instead of Dante in some cases in that lineup, Josh Hart. And I actually don't hate that idea either. I think that's sort of the beauty of this Knicks team this year, is that Mikal Bridges is very versatile. Like he could be the nominal 2 out there. He could be the nominal 3. You could even see a world where if they wanted to go super small, he could be the nominal 4 on the floor, and he's got enough length and defensive prowess to keep up, and certainly, contain some guys. And that's why every team in the NBA wanted this dude on their team, and the Knicks had to bid all the way up to, all those first round picks and everything they gave up to make this happen for Mikal Bridges. So with Hart out there again, it's all cyclical, right? All these questions, because the main thing is like if he could just be a league average 3-point shooter, if he's the worst shooter on the floor, or if it's like him and Randall in a virtual lock at 35% from 3, like that's huge. That's enormous. That means that the Knicks have nobody worse than league average at 3-point shooting on the floor at any given time. And Hart, we see like, and I don't think it's a hot take to say that he offers, outside of the 3-point shooting aspect, like a lot more than Dante DiVincenzo does on the overall, with the rebounding, the ball handling, the passing vision, the transition, instincts and everything. So yeah, I think that there's a real case to be made that as the Knicks probably have to, just by force, explore small ball at the beginning of this season, Tibbs might really enjoy the rebounding aspect. And if Hart comes out and he's shooting the 3 well, I think there's a decent chance that he's a huge part of their plans with that small ball lineup, because then you're not forcing OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges to go bang with these dudes down low and try to get all these rebounds. You can let Josh Hart do that dirty work and then get it out to those guys in transition, who are demons out there. And Mikal Bridges is great in transition. Brunson's great in transition. OG's pretty, decent in transition as well. Like, you get a really fast paced, dangerous lineup out there, going, as you go towards, the scoring transition points or whatever. So yeah, I could definitely see that potentially being a thing. You also noted here, will his 2-point shooting bounce back? And I think that's a big thing to look at as well. He shot 64% from the rim last year, which is the 3rd lowest of his career. And he's been over 70% the last 2 seasons prior to that. So I hope that that can make a comeback as well. Again, with the cyclical nature of it all, I think what has to happen is the 3-point shot needs to come around a little bit. Once people start respecting that, then he could put it on the floor and get a more open, lane to the hoop, because he'll beat the closeout and, get around that guy who closes out a little too hard on him, because he's an actual threat from 3. And then that opens up more opportunities inside. He also might get more of those opportunities early on without Mitchell Robinson there, because, Mitch, as we know, kind of clogs the paint a little bit, despite being such a good offensive rebounder and all that, which we talked about in his season preview in our last episode. But yeah, it'll be an interesting thing to see how his rim shooting comes around this year too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think those small ball lineups, I mean, we always talk about like safety blanket players with Tibbs, and like who is like what gives him comfort. And like we're asking Tibbs to walk out on the plank a little bit, right? Playing small ball. That is not his comfort zone. Josh Hart is a human binky for Tom Thibodeau, right? If Josh Hart is on the floor, Tom Thibodeau is suckling away. I could make a Josh Hart breast milk analogy here, but I think I've already gone way too far and people are tuning out. So I'm going to stop. But point is, Tom Thibodeau's comfortable if Josh Hart is on the floor. And I think just the sheer like bulk that a combination of him, OG, and Randall brings in Tom Thibodeau's mind gives him a little bit of comfort that even if you don't have that traditional rim protector out there, you have enough rebounding, you have enough size, you have enough physicality to still play Tom Thibodeau Knicks style defense. Even if that lineup doesn't have the offensive ceiling of the lineup I proposed, and I've seen a lot of people propose Brunson, Dante, McHale, OG, Randall. But we need to take a quick break. When we come back on Locked On Knicks, we are going to give our goals for Josh Hart this year, our realistic expectations for him, and so much more next on Locked On Knicks. But first, we want to tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. What are you going to put it on? Alex, I'm going to shout you out. You tipped me off to this before we started. The Carolina Panthers, 4.5-point underdogs to the Cincinnati Bengals. I like the way they look. The red rifle back there at quarterback, Andy Dalton, Dave Canales, one of the better play callers in the NFL, taking over head coach, did not show when Bryce Young was in there at quarterback. Deontay Johnson, I have him on 3 of my 4 fantasy teams. So maybe it's a little bit of hope mixed with desperation. But I kind of like the way Carolina's looking in Cincinnati, 0-3. They're going to be a desperate team, but I think the Panthers come out, have a really good game. I like taking the money line there. Again, if you want to get in on that and get started with $200 in bonus bets, head over to FanDuel.com. All right, we are back to wrap things up on this edition of Locked On Knicks. Goals this year for Josh Hart. Alex, what's your main goal for Josh Hart this year?
So my main one, unfortunately, is a little drama based. Because I was thinking about last year for him, and I came back to something that unfortunately I hope doesn't rear its head this year. But my main goal for him this year is don't allow reduced minutes to get into his head or affect his consistency, because I think he got used to a certain lifestyle last year, certainly in the post-injury world where he had to really play a ton of minutes. And I mean, he thrives on that and it was great. And then I was thinking even further back and I was like, and he complained about his minutes early on. And it's almost easy to forget about, but there was a little bit of turmoil around around this exact time, because there was like, I I kind of wonder if his comments were mostly aimed at Quentin Grimes, if I'm being completely honest now, when I look back at it, of basically being like, why is this guy playing period? He's playing terrible. And maybe he was trying to stick up for Dante a little bit here too. But this was his comment that he made last November. It was like November 29th that he made this comment. He said, I'm a rhythm player. So sometimes if I don't touch the ball for 4 or 5 minutes running up and down the floor, just catch and shoot, I might as well be playing with a football. I feel like I have no feel for the ball. There are definitely some times I pass up shots because I'm not in the rhythm. I don't like the feel of it. And he said that and then immediately sort of walked that back. And it was like, no, I'm not saying I'm unhappy. I'm just saying, like, I'm having a hard time finding a rhythm because I'm not playing enough. It's like one of the. I'm not unhappy. I'm just disappointed. Whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
It's very, very parental of him.
Yeah.
But I think my main thing that worries me, Gavin, is that can he keep this amazing play that he ended last year with up without playing 30 plus minutes a game? Because I looked at the stats, and through November 30th last year, which is when he, lodged his complaint, he was playing 28 minutes a game and was concerned he wasn't playing or touching the ball enough at 28 minutes a game. And that kind of makes you wonder, like, uh, all right, like if you're only playing 25 minutes a game this year, are you going to be okay? Like, are you going to just claim that you can't find a rhythm then? Like, is that not enough time if you're playing, a number of stints for like 7 minutes or so per game, something like that? Is that going to be enough for you? Does the power of friendship come through here? Like, because there's another Nova bro on the roster, like he's going to be seating most of these minutes thanks to the addition of Mikal Bridges, who's frankly better than him and one of his best friends. And is that enough to sort of placate him? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but he hasn't played less than 30 minutes a game in a whole season since, like, I looked it up before. I mean, he played in his previous seasons. He has played 33.4 minutes per game last year for the Knicks, 32.3 in the total between the Knicks and the Blazers the year prior to that, total between New Orleans and Portland, he played 33.2 minutes per game. And then you have to go all the way back to 2020 to 21 with New Orleans before you find a season where he played under 30 minutes per game for a whole season. He played 28.7, 27 minutes a year prior to that, 25.6 a year prior to that, and 23 minutes his rookie year with the Lakers. So it's like, is he gonna be okay if he's back to playing basically what he played his second year in the league this year at like 25 minutes a game? I guess only time will tell, but I certainly hope so because I think there's a real chance that that could be in his future.
Yeah, we talked about it pre-show, right? Josh Hart is either underutilized last season, at least. It felt like he was either underutilized or overutilized with a short stretch where he was playing about 30 minutes, which feels correct for him, at least on a roster as good as the Knicks one is. But I think I think it's going to be an issue more so later in the year. I think Mitchell Robinson's injury clears things up where you're just going to have more minutes of small ball. And even if Josh Hart is ultimately not in that closing group, there are going to be nights where he's in that closing group. There are going to be nights where he plays the bulk of the fourth quarter. And I think he'll hover around 30 minutes of the game. So for the first, I don't know, let's just say Mitchell Robinson misses the first like 48 games of the year. Not a huge concern for me. I think later on in the season, come playoff time, Josh, I said it, like he was probably their second best player in the playoffs. And now you put him behind in that pecking order. Definitely Jalen Brunson, definitely Julius Randle, probably almost definitely Mikal Bridges. Good chance he's behind OG Anunoby. Maybe about equivalent to Dante DiVincenzo. Mitchell Robinson, depending on the series, could have like he's not going to touch the ball more, but could be quote unquote like more crucial to the Knicks' chances. And I do wonder how he acclimates to that. Not in that, to your point, like he's a great teammate. Winning is always going to come first. But for any like top 100 player in the league, like all these guys have an ego at the end of the day, right? Like it doesn't matter who they are, how considerate they are. Like there is an ego inherent to being that good. And I think in Josh's case, like he is just so competitive. He wants to be a part of it. He wants to be why the team is winning. And I don't think it'll ever get to the point where he was like a locker room cancer or something, but to his own admission, I think to like, and even though like he'll like complain a little bit when it goes up to 50 minutes a night, which is fair on his part. Like there is a part of his game and his like breakneck effort that relies on knowing I am going to be on the court. And it's something that he has trouble, I think, translating to less minutes. So I think that's a great call by you. And it's going to be interesting to see if he can double down on that, even if he doesn't, quote unquote, have the same rhythm.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't really have anything more to add on that. So, what's your goal for him for this year?
So I put down the 3-point shooting, but I beat that to death. So I'm going to say that he continues to develop chemistry with Jalen Brunson in the short roll. It just felt like in the second half of last year, where the Knicks were like again, like the offensive initiation like lived and died with Jalen Brunson or Josh starting a fast break. The one other thing they could sort of do to get offense would be when Jalen Brunson was trapped, just have Josh Hart come out, set a screen, short roll out of it, and over and over and over again, we saw Josh Hart make the right decision out of that. Again, that's another situation where there are going to be times where defenses are like, we are like Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Dante DiVincenzo. I think that was 3 of the 5 best corner 3-point shooters in basketball last season, if I remember. And defense are going to be like, hey, we're not leaving those guys. And it has to be on Josh Hart to say, all right, I'm going to go downhill and get a bucket. And then there are going to be times where like, hey, Josh, we know you're comfortable going downhill and get a bucket. We're going to leave you wide open for a foul line jumper. And a lot of times Josh will turn that into like a 10-foot floater. And more often than not, he'll make it. So credit to him. But I hope that's something that he's been working on all offseason, just the decision-making in those spots. And even like his mid-range jumper, his straight on three, because like as the Knicks get better and better, the choices get harder and harder for defenses. And we always say, like against great NBA offenses with a lot of talent, you have to concede something. That is going to be the concession more often than not, is going to be defenses daring Josh Hart to score the basketball. And even with all that talent on the floor, he has to play like, again, he's the second best guy, not the 5th best guy on the floor. I have confidence that he'll do it. I just hope he's continued to work on that. It's something I'm looking for early in the year.
Yeah, and I'll just add, in addition to working on short roll chemistry with Jalen Brunson, I hope he does the same with Deuce McBride too.
Yeah.
So I'll actually I'll just reuse a stat that I pulled up for my Deuce preview a little earlier this week, but um, Deuce last year 20% pick and roll frequency and averaged zero point 0.9 points per possession out of pick and roll. And that point per possession number puts him in company with Kyle Lowry, Terry Rozier, Steph Curry, hilariously, and Malik Monk. And the frequency at 20% pick and roll frequency is similar to Kyle Lowry, Drew Holiday, LeBron, plenty of other players that are less good than that, but those are the big names that were in that vicinity. So it's not unrealistic to think that Deuce can, run a little pick and roll with this bench unit. And if Josh Hart is willing to do that and, put his body on the line, set a nice hard screen, like I think that opens up some really interesting possibilities for them if Deuce continued to work on his floater this offseason. If Deuce's 3-point shot even is just, coming around, if Josh is willing to come out there and set a nice screen for him out there, that's great. And then that sort of puts him in a unique position to potentially get an offensive rebound as well when you're coming off that pick and can really crash straight towards the hoop off that shot. It's a great opportunity to then go after that rebound. So hopefully that's something that they take advantage of and don't just drill that with Brunson, but also drill that with Deuce McBride and try to work on that chemistry a little bit. I figure I've been trying to end these preview episodes with just a little realistic expectation for the year. So we wrote that in. I think for me, it's just he continues giving you rock solid bench play. I think that's been his case the whole time with the Knicks, including being one of the first guys Tibbs looked to in the event of injuries, which, the second the injuries pop up, it's like, well, Josh, you're absorbing all that, no matter what position, no matter what player it was. It's like Josh Hart's playing more minutes as a result. And I think it's a well-earned trust at this point. He's a proven contributor. He just plays hard every single minute of every single game that he's out there, even if it's 48 minutes, even if it's overtime, after 48 minutes, whatever, it doesn't matter. He's just out there giving it his all. I think that's all we can expect. And hopefully we just see some of the things that he did so well in the playoffs and whatever that were better than his regular season. We get to just see that same leap happen during the whole regular season this year and hopefully into the playoffs and everything else. And we could just get the best version of him all year. That's my biggest idealistic hope. But realistically, even if he shoots the exact same percentage that he did last year and everything else, he's still a phenomenally useful player and a guy that the Knicks are very lucky to have on their team.
Yeah, I think he just has to stay being a killer is the best way I can phrase it. Regular season, playoffs, like especially with Mitch hurt, I think there's more of a load and more of responsibility on him in the regular season. And I think in the playoffs, even if it's not the number of minutes he wants, and instead of playing 44 minutes a game, he's playing 24 minutes a game. Like if he can play those minutes at like an elite role player level and say, hey, like on paper, he's not better than Derek White, he's not better than Drew Holiday, and there's maybe even like a more substantial gap there than Knicks fans want to admit. Can he, for 6 games, play pretty close to those guys? I think at his very best, he can come close to that over a small enough sample size. And honestly, that's what the Knicks are going to need to beat the Celtics. So I think he can get there. He has to get there if the Knicks are going to hit their goals this year. Anyways, that was our Josh Hart player preview. We're going to have plenty more of these down the pipeline. Book some really fun guests for those episodes. So stay tuned, and we'll have that and so much more coming for you in the next few days, next few weeks, next few months on Locked On Knicks.